with you with what
So
Destiny
now
said.
I wonder what the disagreement will be, if there will be a disagreement on Ukraine. Like again, I don't know what Ben Shapiro's position on Ukraine is, but we are about to see. We're about to see.
Said
My main problem with Biden's policy with regard to Ukraine is that
Okay,
he
let's
outsourced
go.
the end goal of the war to Zelensky early on. Now, that might make sense
What does that mean?
if that goal were something that he was willing to fund to the point of achievement.
He is. Biden is willing to fund the goal to the point of achievement. The problem is that the GOP isn't, and is tying funding it to the point of achievement to the southern border issue. You know, your guys, your friends, you're a conservative, so your buddies are the ones that are blocking the funding till its conclusion. Biden was is willing to fund it till its conclusion. He said he'd even wanted to do concessions on the whole border thing. But now there are also people in the GOP that are saying we shouldn't allow funding for Ukraine, period, because if we do, it'll be a win for Biden, and we don't want to win for Biden because the presidency is coming. So what is even being said here? Hello. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what Destiny says here. Destiny is a lot better on Ukraine than on Israel Palestine. That's why maybe we'll agree on this.
Or if Zelensky could have achieved it on his own. But right
What do you mean by on his own?
now, and this has been true since pretty early on in the war, this point Henry Kissinger made, that pretty early on in the war, it was very clear that, for example, Crimea was going nowhere. The Russian
How was that clear from early on in the war? What? How was that clear early on in the war that Crimea wasn't going nowhere? Where did How did you get to that conclusion? Like Ukraine has launched pretty successful counteroffensives.
had control of Crimea, barring the United States giving permission to fly F-16s over Crimea. Nothing was going to change over there. The same thing was true in most of the Donbass, right, in Luhansk and Donetsk. That was not going to change. Zelensky's stated goal, and you understand it, he's the leader of Ukraine, right, is that there was a predation on his territory in 2014, and that
Okay.
the Russians sent their little green men across the border, and then they took all of these areas. And so he, as the leader of Ukraine, is saying, okay, I want all of that back. Now, the reality is that the U.S.'s interests had largely been achieved in the first few months of the war, meaning the revocation of the ability of Russia to take Ukraine and just ingest it, and two, the devastation of Russia's military capability.
The war is still going, Ben. It's still not decided. It's still not a decided war, Ben. If all aid stops, Russia could still win. You do realize that, right, Ben?
I mean, Russia has just been wrecked. I mean, their military is in serious.
It's not been. Ben is just talking as if Russia is already, as if the war was in past tense. Oh yeah, Russia's been wrecked. It's over. The war is basically over. The war has ended. We can all just relax now. It's so over. No, it's not over.
Straits because of the war in Ukraine. From an American perspective, I'm very much pro all of that. I think that we have an interest in Ukraine maintaining a buffer status against a territorially aggressive Russia. I think that the United States does have an interest in degrading the Russian military to the extent that it can't threaten the Baltic states or threaten.
I mean, it's not there right now. Should the war go not well in Ukraine, it can very well then move on to threaten the Baltic states, including Poland.
Kazakhstan or other countries in the region. The problem I have with Biden's strategy is, as always, I think that it's a muddle. And I think muddles tend to end with misperceptions. War tends to break out and maintain because of misperceptions.
You're pushing a misconception here that Russia is wrecked. Ukraine is running out of ammunition and Russia's pushing. What do you mean?
Misperception of the other side's strength, the other side's intentions, and all of the rest. People misperceive what's going to happen. They say, I'll cross that
You're misperceiving what's going to happen right now.
line and nothing will happen, right? This is what Putin thought. He thought, I'll cross that line. They'll greet me as a liberator. And because the United States just surrendered in Afghanistan, essentially, they won't do anything. And the West is fragmenting because NATO's fragmenting and all the rest of this. And obviously, he was wrong on all of those scores. The problem for Biden is that as
GOP is the problem for Biden. Your party is the problem for Biden, Ben. That's the biggest problem.
with virtually every war, no end line was set. And so it became out recently, it was widely reported, that actually there was a peace deal that was on the table in the
No,
first.
that's bullshit. No, come on. Are you really gonna push this? Are we gonna listen to this again? The infamous... Oh God, we're gonna listen to this mythical deal again.
Few months that Putin was on board with, that basically would have ceded Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea to Russia in return for solidification of those lines, American and Western security guarantees to Ukraine, right? Ukraine wouldn't formally join NATO, but there would be security guarantees.
Oh yeah, because those security guarantees historically have worked so well, especially after Ukraine has given up its nuclear arsenal. Oh yeah, those security guarantees have worked so well historically. Ukraine should just believe in it once again.
To Ukraine. We're ending up there anyway. It's just taking a lot more money and a lot more time to get
Oh
there.
yeah, for sure.
And do you think Trump would have helped push that peace?
He would have ended it in 24 hours for sure.
Yes, and I think that Biden actually did Zelensky a bit of a disservice because Zelensky knows where this war is going to end, and it's not going to end with Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea in Ukrainian hands. It's just not going to, and he knows that. What actually, in my opinion, Zelensky needed was for Joe Biden to be the person who foisted that deal upon him, so that he could then go back to.
That is... Wow. Ben is horrible on Ukraine. I should have expected that.
His own people and say, listen, guys, I wanted all those things, but the Americans weren't willing to allow me to have all those things. And so we did an amazing job. We did a heroic job in defending our own land. We devastated the Russian military, even though no one expected us to. But we can't get back those things because it's unrealistic to get back those things because America, basically, they're a big funder and they're the ones who want the deal. Instead,
Ben knows nothing of Ukraine. Nothing. What? This feels like La La Land.
what Biden said, and this was reported in the Washington Post last year, the Biden administration said, we're going to fight for as long as it takes with as much as it takes. And when they were asked until when, they said, whatever Zelensky says. And that's not a policy. That's just a recipe for a frozen conflict with endless funding. Now, it may be that Putin has walked away from the table and that deal is no longer available. If that deal is available right now, I certainly hope that's being pursued behind closed doors. My main critique, again,
You know nothing about... Oh my God.
of Biden is that when you outsource the end goal,
Yes, totally. With the genocidal regime of Russia, there should be like this. Oh yeah, for sure. That is totally what should happen. Totally.
to another country without stating what America's interest is, that's a problem. I also think that Biden did
I really hope to hear some pushback here because I mean, Destiny has been pretty good on Ukraine, so I'm expecting some pushback here. Wokeism. Monogamy versus open.
really quite a poor job of sort of explaining what America's realistic interests are. I don't like it when American leaders, it's weird for me to say this, but I'm not a huge fan of the we're in it to protect democracy kind of rhetoric. because frankly, we are allied with many, many countries that are not democracies, and that's not actually how foreign policy works. We should, as an overall, 30,000-foot goal, advance democracy and rights where we can. But the reason that we were fighting in favor of Ukraine, and when I say fighting, I mean giving them money and giving them weaponry. The reason that we were doing that in favor of Ukraine is not because...
Well, U.S. is not doing that right now, thanks to the GOP ban. So no, the U.S. is actually not giving money to Ukraine right now, thanks to your political party.
Ukraine's long history of clean voting and non-corruption. The reason that we were doing that is to counter Russian interests in the region. I mean, it was a pure realpolitik play, and that
irrelevant. The reasoning.
Politic play is hard to deny, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. I think that what many Americans are reverting to is we have no interest there. Why are we spending money there and not spending money here, and that kind of stuff. And that argument.
Yeah, it's a very bad argument considering how the budget spending works.
Always be applied unless you actually articulate the reason why it is good for Americans beyond simply the ideological for the United States to be involved in a thing. So,
and yeah, it is good. A lot of the aid money went back to the U.S. economy. That's a point that is being often overlooked. Maybe Destiny here is gonna talk about it a bit.
So, for example, I think right now, when Biden is talking, I think that what Biden just did, the United States, as we speak, is striking the Houthis. I think that that's a really, really good thing. I think that's a necessary thing. I think American people should understand why that is happening. It's not because of quote unquote ideology. Mm-hmm. It is, I mean, on a very root level, but really it's because you're screwing up the straits. I mean, you can't do that. You can't screw up free trade. And Americans have an interest in not seeing all of our prices at the grocery store double and triple because a bunch of ragtag pirates, akin to the Barbary pirates from 1800, are bothering everyone. Right.
So Ben said a lot there. Do you disagree with any aspect on the Ukraine side?
Oh God, I hope he does.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Okay, that's one way to put it. Okay, let's go. Let's see the pushback.
I think on the macro, I agree. Maybe we get into the weasel a little bit on some things. On the final thing that he said, though, I wish that Americans could have honest conversations about foreign policy. I think that it would just be better for everybody. I don't know if it's, Red Scare after the Cold War, where it was like literally, the behemoths, we're fighting against communism. And we felt like after 91, every single foreign policy decision needs to be able to be explained in like 7 words, like he's the bad guy and that's it. I wish we had more honest conversations about what our foreign policy interest is in a particular region, because I don't...
Okay, but that's... Someone else should debate Ben Shapiro on Ukraine. Someone else than Destiny.
I think most Americans honestly could even...
Unless maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised, but...
articulate why Israel would be an important ally, or why it's important to defend Ukraine against Russia, or why should we care about Taiwan at all. I don't know if most Americans could articulate anything there, even though they might have very strong opinions about why.
I mean, we might still see it, so.
We ought to be involved in certain conflicts. So I do agree with that. I wish we had more honest conversations about foreign policy.
Fair enough.
In terms of how Biden has handled Ukraine, the things that I liked the most were, one, that he was very clear in the beginning about what we wouldn't do. So Biden saying that we're not going to do not a red line, no-fly zones over Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be deploying troops on the ground in Ukraine. We're not going to be doing anything that would have, U.S. soldiers and Russian soldiers crossing swords with each other. That's not going to happen. I like that he made that very clear at the beginning.
I mean, it's nice that you like it, but it was obvious from the very beginning. Like, that was the whole premise of the Cold War. So why would the U.S. suddenly change that policy now? That was the whole thing. That was the whole idea behind the Cold War, to avoid direct conflict. So why would that change now? I don't know. There are more competent people on Ukraine than Steven.
And I like that he coalition built between NATO and the EU to get people to send funds, training, soldiers, airplanes, and everything to Ukraine. I thought those 2 things were really good. In terms of basically writing Zelensky a blank check, I would like to hope that Biden and the entire United States...
I mean, Zelensky has presented a plan on how to win several times. It's just that the aid has not been adequate. Let's be honest. It's been a drip. A reactive drip. the aid was mishandled, in my opinion. It was severely mishandled, which caused the counteroffensive to fail, which Ukraine is blamed for. That is the reality of the situation.
States learned a lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan that open-ended missions with unlimited budgets and no clear goal are like the worst foreign policy decisions you can
There
ever.
is a clear goal. That's the whole thing. It means shells start for a long time. This is ridiculous.
They've like defined U.S. foreign policy for the past
Like, Ukraine has defined its goals time and time again.
2 or 3 decades, which is unfortunate, but seems to be the case. My feeling would be, and this is just a feeling, I don't know.
So I don't know. There should be someone else here debating ban on Ukraine.
Internal cables have leaked that say otherwise. Is the Biden administration has probably always.
U.S. advisors also gave bad advice on military. Yeah, we've discussed this with Daedalus. We've discussed this with Daedalus during the counteroffensive. The U.S. basically, U.S. advisors gave advice on how to proceed, but in order for that advice to work, Ukraine would have to have equipment and weaponry that it just didn't have. And U.S. advisors just ignored that Ukraine did not have the means to do the plan. You know? Yeah, Daedalus said that on this stream when we talked, when we had him on. Yeah. You know? They should have gotten the necessary weaponry in order to be able to attack properly. That is what should have happened. They should have received proper help. Destiny is essentially having similar positions. Well, I want to hear it from Destiny.
Had a quiet position of at some point there's going to be an off-ramp here. And I think even a month or two ago, I think those talks were being leaked that discussed.
I want to hear that. I want to hear what I've read from Karasu from Destiny's mouth.
Had begun with Zelensky looking for an off-ramp. But publicly, of course, the United States is never going to come out and say, we are going to support you guys to fight as much as you want for 3 months. And then after that, it's no more. Obviously, that can't be the statement. It's always going to be that we're going to support you in your fight against Russia.
Yeah, we tried that under Obama with Afghanistan. It was terrible.
Sure. Yeah.
I also think Commander said the same thing too. Okay, I want to hear what Karasu is saying from Destiny.
You can't.
We'll escalate the troop levels to X, but only for 6 months, and then we're
you can't. You just can't do that. It's always going to come off as we're going to support you forever, and as long as it takes, and as long as you need, whatever we have to do to defend freedom and democracy in your country. And any other statement would be absurd. So I can understand why it feels like on a public level, a blank check and an indefinite time period was granted to Zelensky, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think I hope we've learned our lessons in the Middle East.
I mean, thanks to the GOP, the aid is basically non-existent now from the U.S. So what are we even talking about?
The forever wars, that this isn't going to be a forever funding to Ukraine to fight for as long as they want.
That could have been a great conversation if the aid was not frozen due to the GOP. That would have been such an amazing conversation to have if the aid was actually flowing from the U.S., but it's not. There's no aid currently from the U.S.
I do disagree. I feel like we're playing a little bit retrospectively, saying that, like, well, it's obvious that they're not going to capture the Donbass. It's obvious that they're not going to capture Crimea.
True. I agree with Destiny here, definitely.
For Crimea, that was incredibly obvious. But it was also really obvious that in 2 weeks, Russia would own Kiev and Ukraine was going to be Belarus
Exactly.
2.0. I think that
3-day operation, as we recall, right?
even for a lot of military...
Like, the West was very reluctant at first. The West was preparing for the fall of Ukraine. So again, we should be careful when evaluating what's so obvious and what's not so obvious. You know, when the invasion started, Polish people started panic emptying their bank accounts because Polish people were sure that Poland's going to be invaded soon or something. That was the thing. People were panicking openly.
Military people and analysts around the world that was an expectation, or at least a significant probability. Nobody knew the phrase that's thrown around now is paper tiger, that Russia's military was as ill-equipped as they were. So I can understand why, especially if you're Ukraine and if you've repelled an invasion from one of the world's largest armies, why you might feel like, well, fuck it, let's fight for a few months, let's fight for a year, let's see what happens. And I can understand the United States supporting them, but I agree that there has to be some reasonable off-ramp.
Can we also, okay, aren't we ignoring in this conversation a few very important aspects? One, the most important aspect, that the stated goal of Russia is the total erasure of Ukrainian national identity, that the stated goal of Russia is the total eradication of Ukraine as a nation. What sort of negotiation would you have with a country like this that is basically saying, oh, that would be just buying time for Russia to attack again? Isn't that pretty clear by now? Has that really not connected yet? That Russia is not a country that will say, oh yeah, we'll, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, yeah, we're good now. We're not gonna invade Ukraine ever again. When Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, the borders of Ukraine were supposed to be respected. Have we forgotten about this? Have we forgotten about this part? Have we forgotten that basically Russia is enacting a genocide in Ukraine now? Transferring children from one group to another forcefully? And that's just one point of the UN Convention that is being extremely met by Russia. In fact, recently, Russia has taken several children with disabilities under the pretense of taking them for rehabilitation and handing them Russian passports. Like, come on. Come on.
Right, but we're not going to fight forever. I think the U.S. State Department has already begun those conversations with Zelensky.
Like, this conversation sounds as if this war was so squeaky clean and nice. Oh yeah, surely if there's a nice deal reached, Russia's just gonna back off and never again threaten Ukraine. Oh yes, that's totally gonna happen, right?
To look at what that off-ramp looks like. But yeah, I'm not too sure, other than like explicitly stating publicly, like, you can only fight until this date. I don't really know what else I would change. I don't think the Biden administration should have done that. I don't know what else.
What do you mean you can only fight till this date? And then what? Surrender?
Do you think Biden should cut this deal on the funding? Meaning there's this $105 billion deal that's been held up by debate between Republicans and Democrats over border, right? So basically it contains $60 billion.
He wanted to cut a deal.
For Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, another several $billion for Taiwanese defense against China, and then include some border funding and some border provisions. Republicans want the border funding and the border provisions because we can get into the illegal immigration issue, but that's a pretty serious issue. And Biden and Democrats have been unwilling to hold that up. And that seems to me like, just from...
That's, to begin with, tying Ukrainian aid with the border topic is just ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous.
Republicans, Democrats, seems like political malpractice. Meaning there's a widespread perception in the
by the GOP, by your party, Ben.
United States, that the
tying totally unrelated issues together and saying we won't allow funding of aid to Ukraine if we don't get our way with the border. Yeah, that is political malpractice. I agree.
A disaster area. Joe Biden wants these things. Many Republicans don't want these things. If he caves on the border stuff, he gets all the things that he wants, and he's going to be able to go back to.
Yeah, so is this going to be the norm now? Either you cave to this other totally unrelated issue that we want, or we're just gonna block this other important issue. Is this gonna be the norm in the US now, moving forward? You have to cave to what we want on this totally separate issue, or we're just gonna, throw a wrench in this country's survival. Like, and this is not political malpractice, by the way. This sort of political blackmail, essentially. Yeah, we're not gonna negotiate or discuss this border thing. You have to cave in because otherwise we'll just torpedo a different important initiative. There we go. Right?
To the moderates in the country and say, I did something.
I have to. They're like, come on, Destin. You have to say something here. You have to say something here. Come on, you have to say something here. There's no way you're not gonna say something here.
Thing about the border. It seems like such an obvious win.
There's no way you're not gonna push here.
Caves on the border stuff, you mean on the Ukraine stuff?
Yes, because then he gets the whole package.
Sure,
Meaning
yeah.
he can go back to his own base and he can say, listen, guys,
There's no way. There's just no way Destiny's not gonna push back on this.
I wanted to be easy on the border. The Republicans forced me to it, but we needed the Ukraine aid. We needed the Taiwan aid, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
You're going to be more educated than me on this. I don't like, or maybe I just
Oh
don't.
my God. Oh, come on. Steven, come on. Get someone else here. Okay.
Don't know enough. I don't like the principle that when we negotiate things in the United States, there's like 50 million hostages at all points in time for every single thing. Like, oh boy, here comes the debt ceiling. What do the Republicans want? What do the Democrats want? Oh boy, like here, we can't fund our government. But I mean, obviously, the argument is going to be that if the Ukraine funding doesn't come in this bill, and if Biden and his administration feel like it's really important, that not unilaterally, but as a single issue, it's not going to pass. So I would say that at this point, and I don't know what the conversations look like between the Biden administration and Zelensky, I would say at this point that it's probably fair to start making contingencies on the money that we give to Ukraine. That listen, like this conflict has, waged on now. Like now we need to start looking for potential peace. We can't just.
I didn't think Destiny was so ill-equipped to discuss Ukraine. I really did not. First of all, oh God. Oh. Why? Europe also exists still. And there have been already talks that Europe might need to just support Ukraine on its own without the US. There is no aid right now. There's no aid right now coming from the US. Have you considered, Ukrainians might be genocided, an occupation of territory which at this point Russia wants, means torture, mass murder, and who knows what else of Ukrainian people. I know that's gonna happen, but have you considered that we should just sit down and negotiate, maybe? Have you considered that? This is frustrating.
Write you an unlimited check. So, I mean, if those strings are attached, I'd be okay with it. But the broader question of like, is it okay to make this particular piece of legislation with all this funding contingent on the Ukrainian funding? I mean, that just seems to be the way the government works now, unfortunately.
Quick pause. Bathroom break.